There was a world before COVID and a world after COVID. And in the COVID years, a lot of exporters and importers did it really tough.
Hi, welcome to another episode of the Global Trade Show. I'm Lawrence Christoffels, and today I'm absolutely delighted to have in studio Collins Rex, who's an absolute legend of international trade, which we'll get into a little bit. But Collins, thank you so much for stopping by while you're in Melbourne.
Thanks very much for having me, Lawrence. We've been talking about this for years and we're finally getting around to it. It's great.
Absolutely. Now, I mean, you've got such a long resume and experience, but can we start by telling the viewers and the audience about your background and why you're so passionate about global business and international trade?
Well, I guess, the world runs on global trade. If we didn't trade, I don't think we'd have civilization. So as long as you've had two people in the universe, you've had people selling and buying from each other. So that's the bottom line. And, I come from a background that is very varied. I started in media a very long time ago and almost by accident fell into global trade. But it's just one of those things that floats my boat.
Yeah. So you've got huge credentials. You've worked with government agencies, industry associations, private companies. So, and you've really helped not just provide advice, but you can really mentor companies too and agencies.
I think that's pretty much the thing that I really enjoy. It's one thing, to be involved in policy discussions and things of that nature. It's another thing to actually work with people who are physically doing the job.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I find most encouraging. And I love doing it. I love working one-on-one with companies and seeing them grow and, helping them overcome some of those hurdles that they think are insurmountable. And once you actually sit down and you talk through some of the issues, people discover that it's possible to do pretty much anything if you put your mind to it.
Yeah. You've been around international trade for many decades. How have you seen things shift over the last few years, and what's your view on what might be happening in the future?
We should have learned some very valuable lessons from COVID. There was a world before COVID and a world after COVID. And in the COVID years, a lot of exporters and importers did it really tough. And then COVID disappeared and people kind of went back to business as usual and they forgot many of the lessons that should have been learnt. And I think the last sort of 12 to 18 months has proven that there is no such thing as business as usual anymore. Trade volatility is an everyday occurrence. It's here to stay. And we should have learnt and parked some of those lessons from COVID, because then we'd be in a much better position today to deal with the shocks. But I don't even think we need to see them as shocks. We just need to see them as trade. And that is the reality of the world in which we live, that every morning brings its own challenges and its own rewards. And it's important for businesses to have the flexibility and the agility to cope with whatever comes.
Yeah. I think there's, as you said, disruption now is the new norm, and, inability to predict, especially when it comes to supply chain and volumes and inventory and forecasting. It's such a hit and miss for so many companies.
It goes beyond just the inventory and keeping your supply chain going, which is a challenge in and of itself. But it goes towards being aware of all the shocks, everything from the way in which you plan your business to the way in which you run your business, getting your goods into the hands of your buyers, etc. It covers the entire gamut from one end to the other. But very importantly, it covers now where people are doing business. And market selection is way more important than it ever was before. And I think, a lot of businesses, even really large, successful businesses, have done things almost by default and by accident. Those days are done. There has to be some real strategy behind where you do business, how you do business, what you sell in that market. And diversification, not just in market, but in product range, in customers in a specific market, so that if something goes pear-shaped, something else is there ready to take its place.
Yeah, well, great advice. I think, especially with your expertise around market entry for companies, that is what you just pointed out is so enable, because companies have typically gone after a single market to start with and then sort of get their foundation, then goes to the next market. But now it's probably changed. You just got to go 3 or 4 markets at once.
Choose the markets wisely. It's not a case of, we did business, for example, in the Middle East. The Middle East is problematic now because the Strait of Hormuz is closed and we can't get stuff there. So we're just automatically going to pivot to Singapore. well, why Singapore? And I think this is the question. It's that why question that many businesses have not asked in the past that they have to ask today. If we pivot to another market, what are the implications of that? So we decide to go to Singapore. Well, a lot of goods still make their way to Singapore through the Strait of Hormuz. So you've got exactly the same issues as if you were going to the Middle East. So where else? And why else? Can you get your price there? Is there a real need for your product there? And the days of choosing a market just because the demographics look right on paper. Lots of people, lots of money. Well, they're not necessarily for what you have to sell.
Yeah, that's right.
And so it has to be strategic. And I think if nothing else that people take away from anything we discussed today or indeed at any time is that strategy is all important.
Yeah, and get down into the weed, get granular, work out who your ideal customers are, partners are, and those type of things.
Absolutely. It's one thing to sell to someone, but who do they sell to? You need to know your customer's customer, keep your customer happy as a result, and you'll have long-term relationships. And again, there's the other word. There's strategy on the one hand, relationships on the other. The better the relationships you have in market, the better the relationships you have with your freight forwarder, your customs agent, with governments. Relationships are what it's all about. So if you have the right strategy, you have the right relationships, you can weather just about any storm.
I want to sort of tease that out a little bit more. As you said, COVID pushed all of us online, and people are still doing all of our work and many meetings online with Teams or Zoom, all these type of things. But it doesn't, as much as that's great and convenient and cost effective in many ways, it still doesn't beat that in-person rapport building and relationship building.
Absolutely. And, yes, what COVID did do was give us the technology to actually do a lot of stuff online. You don't have to fly to, and I always cite this example. I did some work in Belarus some years ago, long before the war in Ukraine. It took me 48 hours to get there. I was on the ground for 22 and then 48 hours back to Australia. That was insane. We don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
And that is the one thing that we got from COVID. We now have the technology that enables us to not do that. But when it comes down to it, when it's the nuts and bolts stuff, when you really need to understand a market, when you need to understand your customer and show that you're serious, that's when you get on an airplane and you go. And you can do as much as you like online. At some point in the relationship, if the relationship is going to be a lasting one, you have to do it face to face.
Yeah.
And of course, if you're selling into a market, you don't really know that market until you've walked the streets, seen the sights, smelt the smells, gone to the shops, all of that sort of stuff, all the stuff that we learned as trade rookies many, many years ago. It still holds true today. You can do as much as you like online and do as much as you can, save the time and the energy and the money, but sooner or later you're going to have to go.
Yeah, absolutely. When we bring it back to here in Australia, what are some of the opportunities, and where, in both terms of sector and markets, what do you see as someone who, you're really well across the global machinations of trade? Where would you sort of see Australia sitting now with opportunities with some new FTAs recently and all these type of things keep evolving? Give us some tips of that.
Let's look at the FTAs. Free trade agreements are great ways to enter markets, partly because governments put lots of money behind market development when there is a new FTA. So the European Union FTA is case in point. Having said that, FTAs in and of themselves don't mean a thing when it comes to business, right? They're not going to get you any business. They're not going to make business any easier to do. They will reduce tariffs, which makes you more price competitive. But the key advantage is that both markets, in particularly the new FTA, are very keen to promote the FTA, which means the Australian government will help you to go into Europe much more than they would have 5 years ago, for example. So that's the first thing that needs to be said. And understand the FTA, understand the benefits, understand how those benefits accrue to you. But in terms of where Australia sits, I mean, we have a vagary of distance, which, whether we like it or not, we're far from just about everywhere in the universe. And that means that whatever it is you sell is going to cost you more to get into the hands of your customers than many of your competitors. But Australia plays very well in some spaces. One of those areas is METS, so mining equipment, technology and services. We do that better than just about any other country in the world. And that's because we are a mining nation. So we have a lot to offer there. We do really well in agriculture, and not just stuff that we grow and animals and the like, but tech. We do ag tech really well here. And of course, technology is easy to get into the hands of people. So those are two areas immediately that spring to mind. In terms of markets, I've been tooting the horn of this particular market, if you can call it that. It's actually 54 separate ones. But I've been tooting the horn of Africa for
huge,
more
yeah.
than 20 years. And I think we're finally getting to the position where people are starting to say, yeah, maybe it's worth the risk. And yes, it is. It's a risky environment. But then so is a lot of part of Asia, and risks are only risks if you can't mitigate them. And I think if you go in with your eyes open, so certainly the met sector, the agri sector, but services, financial services, again, where Australia is really strong, and just about anything else, because it's a market that's growing. It's also a very young market.
Yeah, that demographic is phenomenal.
It's actually scary.
Yeah.
And that means staff, young people that you can employ, that you can upskill, that could work for you in market. Lots and lots of opportunities. Yeah. So that would be my hot button at the moment, would be Africa.
Wonderful. Again, coming back to, if I would categorize, you've got so much experience with exporters. Can we give a few tips that you've already touched on a few, but in 2026, we're already halfway through the year. What sort of tips have you seen yourself change over the last, say, couple of years? Like, what have you started to train them differently or educate them differently on?
I think the classic export 101, let's start with docs
Yeah.
and then work our way through, that way of training is done. Having said that, you can't not understand the nuts and bolts. You can't not understand documentation and so on. But the first thing that I would say is get yourself a really good team of experts around you. Make sure that you've got a really good freight forwarder that understands the documentation, so you don't have to understand it as technically as you probably would otherwise. So get yourself a really good freight forwarder. Get yourself a really good lawyer.
Yeah.
Whether it be sales contracts, and those need to be revised regularly. You can't have a suite of contracts and not look at them for 5 years. Or in some cases, I've just recently spoken to some very experienced large companies, and I've asked, have you recently revised your sales contracts? And they've said 15 or so years ago.
Wow.
Which is madness. So get a good lawyer. If your accountant is a local kind of person, actually you get someone with international experience.
Yeah, countries or regions, they've got their own applicable jurisdiction for repatriation of funds, getting your payments out of that market.
Absolutely. And your local person, they might be delightful and you love them and they've been part of your business forever, but they don't necessarily understand local. So build a team of experts that are not of your business. You don't have to employ them, but you engage them when you need them. So make sure you've got people that understand. If you're dealing with a specific market, make sure you've got people on the ground in that market that can assist you, so that if you do have a problem, there's somebody there that can go and step in and have a meeting with you on your behalf. So do that. That would be one of my primary sort of tips. The other is, if you are changing markets, if you're thinking of entering new markets, do your homework.
Yeah.
Do your research. There's no excuse for not having proper research done. Artificial intelligence has made it so easy for us to get facts and figures. Get the research done, choose your market appropriately, and then go and have a look at it. Get on an aeroplane, go and talk to people face to face, see what you're doing, how you're doing it. Go to a trade show. The Australian government, whether it be federal or whether it be state governments, are always doing things. Get yourself onto a state government trade show. Go along under the badge of government and, to a large extent on the government dime as well, which also helps. Go, show, and talk to people face to face, and then make calculated decisions about what you do.
Yeah.
But more than anything, keep your finger on the button. You cannot assume that you roll out of bed today in the same way that you rolled out of bed yesterday and business is done the same way, because it's not.
Well, the speed of change and the speed of opportunities is just increasingly at a massive rapid rate. So as you say, I think keeping up to date with what's changing, what opportunities, what could be impacting your distribution, you need to be able to be, what's the word, agile. Everyone's talking about agility with this. So
Yeah, and the old SWOT analysis that everybody should have done and hardly anybody does, but do it on a regular basis and understand that every threat is also an opportunity. And if you look at it that way, then it's not as terrifying as it could be, because I think we can easily be stunned into inaction because, well, it's changing too fast and I can't keep up and I don't know what I do. So I just sit and, do la 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 and put my fingers in my ears. See it as an opportunity, because your competitors might not. if you see it as an opportunity, you can turn just about anything else around.
Yeah. Well, I think, Thomas, what are your current projects at the moment? You've always got a number of hats that you're wearing. Are there anything that you need to tell the audience about that they need to watch out for?
Well, if you're in WA, we've got a great series of breakfast events. I'm doing a series of roundtable breakfast events in Perth in the agri space. And those are great fun because we literally sit around a table and ask questions. And well, I ask questions and I get answers and I tease and I'm quite provocative. As somebody said to me just in the last couple of days where I was running one of the breakfasts, "Oh, you don't take any prisoners." "Oh, no, I don't." We have a great discussion.
It's for their own good, essentially. I think I've seen you in action. It's phenomenal. I think the way that you really get the most out of all the participants, and you do challenge them, which is what you're meant to be doing.
Yeah, that's something that's happening at the moment. There's a podcast series that's coming out that I can't say too much about, but watch this space sort of thing. And if you're in the med sector and you're wanting to look at Africa firsthand, I'm going to be working with Ostmine on electromining coming up, and I think there's some spaces still available there, so people can actually get involved and sweet on the ground. And then there's all sorts of other bits and pieces. There's some exciting stuff coming up, which is always great. Looking forward to the results of the Export Awards, for example, in Victoria and all the other states and then the nationals. So that's going to be interesting. I know that there was some great stuff coming out of Victoria, for example. We also have the iAwards coming up. All the state award ceremonies are running around.
Thanks so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule while you're here in Melbourne again. We look forward to staying in touch. It's amazing to see how you just continue to create value and adding value to so many companies and agencies around the world. So absolute pleasure to catch up again.